Hello and welcome to another Pixel Game Maker tutorial. Today's video we're going to go over scene transitions, and particularly we're going to go over the screen flow transitions right here. There's two different types of transitions, a portal transfer or the screen flow. We're going to start with the screen flow and we will have another video on the portal transfers. Alright, so this project is just one of the sample projects. It's the side view fantasy, and this is how it comes set up. It has these different stages, and if we go to the transition tab, which is where all your scene transfers start, you'll see that we have some of these already on. And the reason why these are probably on is because they were play testing these scenes at some point. If you just created a new scene, then it actually would not be in this space. It would be over here though, and it would be white. You can see that the grayed out ones are already out here. And so if you wanted to add some, you can just drag them in like this. And do notice that once you do, you can't drag in, say, another one. Now you can, just like action nodes, create a shortcut. So you can have as many shortcuts as you would want. That will come in handy. But for the most part, you would just have your scene and then the next scene that you want. And do note, if you right click, you can add links, or you can set this as the start scene, or you can delete or create a shortcut. So in this case, I do want to show you something. If we say we deleted this scene and we go to our scenes tab here and we went to stage 102, we can say set this as the start scene, and if we go back to transitions, we can see that it has placed this onto this. So that's why there was so many grade ones when we first came into this transitions tab, because they were play tested at some point and set as the start scene at some point. All right, so I will clean this up a little bit, set this one back as the start point. All right, so now we can actually go on to how we can make a transition. So what first thing we need to do is, just like action knows, is we need to add a link, and then we can click on the next stage that we want this screen flow to go to. All right, and we can do the same thing where we can move the points like this, or we can hold shift and we can move them, move it together. But once we have it situated where we want, we now are presented with some options over here on the right. And so these are broken up into three different sections. We have the changeover conditions. So this first tab is going to be the conditions in order to trigger this transfer. And then the second tab is the sequence before changeover. And then the third tab is the sequence for after the changeover. So when you think of the before changeover, this is the sequence that's going to happen on the current scene that you're leaving, and then the after changeover is going to be the sequence that happens on the next scene that you're entering. So it's a very easy way to think about it. What do I want to happen while I'm still on the current scene? And then what do I want to happen when I get to the next scene? So that's how it is broken up. And for this video, I'll be going in a linear fashion down these lists just like this. So if there's something in particular that you need, you can just fast forward until I get to that section. The only exception is going to be this default position change right here. I will be getting to this one last. All right, so we start on the top, we have the priority, and this is going to be the link priority. So for instance, let's say that we had another link that we can get to this stage from, and also another link. So we have three possible ways that you can leave this stage and enter this stage. Now, they're all priority of 0. So by default, with them all being 0, it's going to prioritize the first created link. So this one will be the top priority. Then this next one, since it was the next created link, it will be the second priority. And then this third one, since it was the last created link, it would be the last priority. So we can actually reverse that by changing the priority. And what we can do is, the higher the number of priority, the higher it is on the priority list. So we could reverse this by saying this last link we want to be a value of 2. So then that would put this one above all these other links. Then we could come to the second link and we could say we want this to be a value of 1. And so we could leave the first created link at 0, and then this one would be the highest priority, this one would be second highest, and then this one would be the lowest now. So that is how priority works. We can delete these ones now that we understand that concept. And real quickly, do note that you can color your links if you need to. And if you want to specify a color, you can actually double click into them and you can specify color. In this case, I want it to remain the black, so I'll just hit OK there. And then this one we're going to go over at the end. So now we'll go on to this next one, which will start us off for the condition settings. And this is going to be whether all these conditions need to be met or if any of these conditions can be met. And so this is very handy to say, to have multiple conditions and say all of these must be met. And if that's the case, you click this one. But if you have, say, some input one or previous scene ends or a switch happens, then you could use any and it would trigger based off of any of those things. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at any for now. We're probably going to go one by one with these. So by default, these links come with no input selected and the following has been input selected. And so that is why it's giving an incomplete link. The dotted line means that the link is not valid yet. And the reason why is because we haven't assigned a input. So if we actually uncheck this, you can see that it goes bold or solid. And then that is because the no input is a valid check. So we can actually simply test this out by just clicking play test and not doing anything. And you can see that it changed over and it changed over to this darker forest area. If I hit F5, you'll see it's a light and then it goes to the dark forest. And I have no player object in there. That's why there is no player object that appears. All right, so we know that no input works. Now, why is there a delay and stuff like that? We'll get into that is definitely based off these sequence tabs. So the next one is when I'll click off no input now and I'll click on input. And then I'm going to add the A button. So we'll just say when A is pressed, and we want it to be a press in this case, we'll hit OK. So now if A is pressed, we can play test this. And when I press A, you can see that it's actually the jump button. So you can see that it starts to jump, but it triggers the transition right away. And then it goes into the next scene. Again, we'll get into that delay of why it took so long. But that is how that would work. Now I'll uncheck this for now, and then we can go down to these other condition settings. So this one is an actually really good one to use. It's called previous scene ends. So if we click on this one, we now have set this link to trigger when we use the runtime action end scene. And that is found in the objects here. So if we were to go to player and we would go to the jump action, click on other runtime action, and I believe it's on tab 3. And we have this runtime action right here called end scene. And so when we run this end scene, it's actually going to trigger that link condition. And so if we were to play test here, I'll go back in transitions and play test, and you can see that when I jump, it triggered the scene, even though we didn't have the input set for it like we did last time. We had it seeking for end scene runtime action. All right, so now we can go on to the next option, which is going to be after a certain amount of time passes. So I'll click on that, click off the end scene one, and we could say 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds, this link is going to trigger to go to the next scene. So we can play test, I can walk around, and then after 3 seconds, it pauses me, does the sequence, and then goes to the next scene. Now what's cool is we can actually couple this, say, with the input. And in this case, since we want both of these, then we would want to click all. So I'll click on all. And when we play test, I will jump. Okay, so this is something that's really important to know, is you can see that I tried to jump, but it just reset me into this same scene. Now, this is very interesting. Notice that I do not have end scene anymore, but I'm still calling end scene in my jump runtime action. And that is because the end scene, if it's not set as a link transition, it will restart the current scene that you're in. So if I simply skip this for now, go back to transition and then play test here, now I can jump and it's not resetting the scene. And so you notice that I was pressing the A button, but because 3 seconds hadn't passed yet, it's not counting that A button for the transfer. Now that it's been 3 seconds, I can press A and it will transfer. So once again, I'll reset this and I will jump around, and you can see that it's all fine. And then after 3 seconds, I can jump, and then it transfers. So this input can only be validated, or basically all these conditions can only be validated after certain time passes. So after 3 seconds, if these things are true, then it will go to the next scene. All right, so now we can move to the last option, which is the switch variable changes. And what this is going to allow us to do is to have a true statement or a value associated with this transition. And so simply what we can do is I have created a common switch called can teleport. And so we're going to say when this switch is on and we press A, because I have it at all conditions met. So this switch has to be on and press A. So what we can do with this is we can go to an object, and I'll say this save point that's here, and I'll say that we will turn this switch on, or sorry, we'll start it off because we want it to be off in the wait state. And then when we are in a certain range, we'll just pretend this is a teleporter. When we're in a certain range, we'll turn it on. And that range is just set by a distance between the object. And then when the distance is outside that range, then it will go back to not being able to use it. So now in our scene, if we add this teleporter and we play tested, we can see that it plays when I'm in range and when I'm not. When I'm out of range, I can jump around like normal, but when I'm in range, it turned that switch on, and now when I press A, it does the scene transfer. So it's a very quick and easy way to actually make input is pressed, but also making it have a condition associated with it. So now let's go over a useful way to use a variable in this case. So now I'll change this, and instead of using a switch, I'll go to a variable. Again, it's a common, and I called this next scene. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say if the next scene equals to 1, then we want from this scene, we want it to transfer to this next scene. So then what we're going to do is have a couple more stages here, and we're going to Control C and Control V, copy paste basically. And then on this link, we're going to say if the next scene equals 2, and we'll just do 2 for now because I think the concept will be gotten from that. And so then what we can do is we can go to, in the objects here, we can change this switch, and we can say we want it to be a variable, and we want it to be common, and we want it to be the next scene. All right. And I'm not going to set this equal to, or this one will always equal 0. That's correct. So we'll just do this. Next scene equals 0, which means that there is no scene to transfer to because we're out of the range, right? So this next one here, what we want it to do is we want it to be the common variable next scene, and we want it equal, but we're not going to give it a number. We're going to hit OK, and then we're going to hit changeable even after placement. And so then what we're going to do is in the scene, we can click on this first teleporter, and we can say, all right, this scene is going to transport us to scene 1, and then we'll add in another one, and this one will change us to the next scene 2. So this one will bring us to 1, this one will bring us to 2, and now we can play test this. And when we're in range on this one, if we hit A, you can see that we go to that scene. And then if we restart and go to this one, we can hit A again. You can see that it brings us to this other scene. So that is one way that we can use the variables to differentiate what scene we're going to. It's very useful practice. And now I can delete these ones. Won't need them for now. And I'll also remove this next scene here since we understand the concept. And I'll leave A on press and then just leave it as all. That's fine. So now let's get to the default positions after the change. And so this is referring to starting points, and particularly the group that the starting point is associated to. And if you drop this down, you can see that we have an A through Z group. All right. So first off, we need to understand what starting points are. And if we go into the scenes, you can see that initially I just have the object from the object list, this player 1 right here. This is all that this object is. Okay. Well, that's not a starting point. Okay. So if we want to differentiate where we spawn in, we need a starting point. And starting points are just right at the top of the object list, and you can grab them in and you can drop them in. Now, if you don't have them set up correctly, they're going to be blank like this. And so I'm going to delete this object here because we're going to set this starting point up to be the player object. And so what you do is you go to settings, you go to player character management, and if it's a single player game, you're going to go under the first player and you're going to add and you're going to select the object that this starting point will be. And you'll hit OK. Now it's loaded. You'll hit OK. And now you can see that we have our player. All right. So now this is a starting point, and if we were to play test, you will see that the player is just the same, and it does everything just as a normal object that you put into the scene does. So now what we can do with this is we can start using starting points to gauge where you can spawn. So in the scene here, we can go to the second stage. This is the one that we spawn into, the darker forest area. And now here we can start setting some different starting points. So we can set a starting point of, say, A right here, and then we can set a starting point of, say, B up here. So over here on the right, you see the starting point group. You can come down here and select B, and now you have A, and now you have B. All right, so now we go back to the transitions here, and we can say the starting point group A, so we know that in this next scene, we're going to spawn right here. And now let's just change it. Well, let's do it at A first. Let's play test. And you'll see that when I press A, I spawn right here. And I'm sure I didn't spawn on the right layer. Let's check. Yeah, I didn't spawn on the right layer. So to simply fix that, you can click on this and you can click on placement layer, click main, and click main. And now they won't fall. But now that we know that we spawn right there, let's go to B now and let's play test. And now when I hit the teleport, you can see that I spawned at B. So this is where you can get different starting points dependent on your transition. And so if we did the same thing where let's just say that we had another link, and let's say now that we are checking for a switch again, and this switch again was the common scene and it was equal to 2. So this will be the second teleport. And then on this first one, we had a switch, and again, it was equal to the scene, but this one was equal to 1. And we'll set this group to A, and this group will be B. We can play test this. We can go to this first one, and we spawn at A. If we restart and we go to the second one, we spawn at B. So that is how you can gauge some variance in where you spawn and all these other things. And you also get quite a bit of variance. I mean, you get A through Z. So you have all of these different options of where you can spawn per scene. All right, so I will delete this one here, and just to make it simple, I will get rid of these. And now we can move on to the sequences. So let's start with the sequences before changeover. And really we could do these at the same time because they both have the same screen sequences to start with. And so the reason why we had a weird delay when we were testing these in the beginning was because the screen sequence is none, and it's the same for after, it's set to none. And then it also had a time until completion was 1 second, and that's the same with the after changeover as well. It had 1 second. So it took 2 seconds to actually change over completely. It took 1 second to change over from the first scene, which was that 1 second delay. And you really didn't notice it, but in the second scene, there was another second delay before you could actually start moving. And so what we can do is we can actually add screen sequences to this. There's a black, and then if you come over here, you see the same options. I'm going to leave this at none so that you can really see what this before changeover is doing. But if we did a black and we started to play test this and we hit A, you can see it faded to black. Notice it didn't fade in though. All right. And that's because that's what the after screen, the after changeover is for. If I was to change this to black, I could now match that and it would be a fade in. All right. And you could actually, I'll just leave the after as black and I'll do the before as white. and you'll see that it goes white and then a black fade in. So you can have these cool little combos if you want. And then if they have some other options like slide up, so you can actually slide the screen up and then it fades into the next one. Or you could actually have the after changeover slide up as well. So the before the current scene slides up, and then the next scene will slide up. So let's try this out and see what this looks like. Just like that. Now, 1 second might be too long, so maybe we could cut that in half. This is the amount of time that it takes to do the sequence. So we can see that now it goes a little bit faster. And what's really funny is we could combine these and we could say the changeover will slide up, but then we want this one to slide in right. So we can do something like this and we can get some cool little scene transitions. Now, what's really interesting, and yeah, so you got the up, down, left, right slides and then the fade. What's really interesting is if you do none, you can do none. And if you gave this transition time of 0, and if we were to play here, you can see how fast that changed over. So we can just, I mean, it was like super fast. So you can see that there is a way to make it an instant changeover if you want, or you can have a little delay or have a slide or a fade out. So for the rest of the tutorial, I'll just do a normal black fade out and I'll do a time of 0.3. I've always found 0.3 to work really well. So it's going to look something like this. Right, and now we can go to the next options, which is going to be about the music, specifically about the background music. And so here we get a few options. Let's get into them. The first one I'm going to go into is continue. So let's continue playing the background music from this sequence before changeover. All right, so in the scenes here, I'm going to select on this first scene, go to scene setting, and I'm going to play a song, and we'll hit OK. And we'll go to transition here and make sure everything's set up right. So I'm going to continue the sequence. And note that I'm playing on the after changeover, I'm going to play back the scene setting BGM. So let's just see what happens here. I'm going to play test. We can hear the music going. I'm going to press A. And then you can see that it continued during the fade out, but it just stopped on the fade in. All right. So now if we went to changeover and we hit continue, let's try that. And you can see that it just continued. And the reason why is on the after changeover, it was set to play the scene setting BGM. Well, there was no scene setting BGM. So because of that, it just stopped. Now we can actually specify a BGM to play. So we could say, let's play this opening 2, and we'll loop it while we're there. And if we were to play, when we press A, it changes to a new song. So we could actually change our song for the scene or our music in these links if you want. All right, so let's go back to the before changeover, and I'm actually going to, we'll stop this for now. So in the before changeover, we can actually stop the music, and you'll see that it's an instant stop. Okay, so it was an instant stop. We can also have a faded out version of that. So it faded out. And what's really interesting now is we'll come down to this timing and we can say, do we want this change or stop in this case to start when the fade out starts or when the fade out ends? So if you notice right now we have it set to when the fade out starts. So as soon as I press A, the music stops. All right. So now what we can do is we can actually set it to when the black fade out stops, and it will change the timing of when it stops. So you could see there that, and really I should probably make this a little longer so we could see the full. So here's a second, and I'll hit A, and it was a second before it stopped. Whereas if I do when it starts, it was instant, then it faded out. All right, so that's what this option's saying, and it's pretty handy to have that option. And then again, we can click fade out. So when we do it, when the sequence stops, it will then fade out. Just slowly like that. All right, so now that's what stop and fade out does. Now we can go to the playback settings, and this is again, we can actually use the scene settings, which in this case, if we use the scene settings, I do not, it might restart actually. Let's try it. So I'm gonna hit A. Okay, so it continued. Okay, so that's good. So it continued, but on this after changeover, if I say I want the scene setting, okay, so now we have to go to scene 2, and we're going to set the same BGM that scene 1 has. All right, I hope this part's making sense. Some of this is a little confusing. All right, so we're going to play the scene setting, and in this one, we're also going to play the scene setting when we go to the next scene. I think this is the one that might restart the song. So the song's going, press A, and see it restarted. So that's something to keep in mind, is that this will reset even if they're the same song. So if you were in the situation where they both have the same song, you wanted it to use the scene settings, you would just click continue on this after changeover, and when you transition, it would just do a nice smooth continue. All right, so that is it. The loop BGM just means that the song that you're going to choose, you're going to loop it. But for us, I'm just going to use a continue and then continue. Now, the last thing is that on the after changeover, this timing right here is dependent as well on when it starts and stops. So you have this option too on the after changeover. All right, so now let's go over to the before changeover, this last option here, which is to play a sound effect. So we can go to sound effect and we can just say, let's do, they got one for, let's do right, okay? Which we did the right option. All right, so if we play tested this, you can hear that sound effect that it played. All right, now these volumes right here, so if you are choosing from this option right here, the volumes that you would have to adjust are actually going to be in the sound effects tab. So without taking too much time here, if I was to scroll down to right, I could then lower this volume and we'd probably barely hear it right here. Yeah, you barely heard it. So this volume becomes the master volume for that sound effect. All right, so on to the last thing, and that is the options that are only in the after changeover. And that is that we can actually start the scene with a certain switch on, and we can also start the scene with the object to start in a specific runtime action or in an action. And that's very useful for if you have, say, a cutscene. So let's start with the change switch here, and just to show that this is how it works, we will go to the switch, we'll go to the common, and we'll say can teleport, and we'll change it to on. So it starts off, but when we transfer, we're going to change it to on. So we will hit that, and just to show that it does a variable as well, we'll do next scene, and we'll make that equal to 5. We'll hit OK, and we will play test this. And when we switch over, we can go to our common values here. We can see that can teleport was turned on, and we can see that next scene was changed to 5. And now I will clear those, and we'll go to object actions, and we will grab the player object here, and we'll say that I'm just going to have it jump. So as soon as we get to the next scene, the player is going to be in the jump action, and it's going to jump. Or in this case, if you had a cutscene, you would place it in the cutscene action, assuming that that was a part of your player object. Now, do note that you can actually do common actions that are associated inside the player object. First, let's stick with this jump here, and we'll click OK. And so now when we play test here, and I close this out and jump, you will see that it changed over, and I started in my jump, and I did a little jump. Now, what's really cool here is we were talking about common actions here, so we can go to the common actions and add it, and then we can just have one, and we'll just call this one cutscene or something, and then all I'll do is I'll just add a jump. All right, and that way we know that it worked. Then we'll go to the transitions and select the cutscene right here. So it's going to go to the common action cutscene, which is really cool that it can do that. And when I jump, boom, it jumped, it went to the common action, and now it returned to the idle. All right. Now, if you were to do a cutscene, say this way, you would probably have to lock it out. You could do that a couple ways. You could have two links, basically, and one link is if the switch is off, and then one link is if the switch for that cutscene is on, because you'd most likely associate the cutscene completion with a value, either a switch or variable. So you'd have to maybe have a couple links to do it this way. I think there's other easier ways to do cutscenes. This was just a completely random example. And before we call it a wrap, I forgot to point out, on the after changeover, you can also play a sound effect. So you can play a sound effect on the before and on the after. All right. So with that said, that's about it as far as screen flow transitions go. They're very handy, especially if you want to use the starting points for the groups. If you have any questions, please drop them below. Come to the Discord or the Steam forums. And with that, I'll see you at the next video.